We're really excited to have everybody tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Diane Alps with the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium, and we welcome you to Deeper Dive, our monthly webinar series. Deeper Dive is an extension of our Cabrillo Whale Watch Naturalist program. It's a partnership between the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium and the Los Angeles chapter of the American Cetacean Society. We've been partnering for starting our 52nd year this year with our Cabrillo Whale Watch Naturalist program that I was just talking about, our training. But I am with the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium, and I'm really excited for those of you that are local and in the Los Angeles area. I hope you'll consider coming to our annual Sea Scare. We have 2 full nights of really fun Halloween thrills and chills and some gills, because it's at an aquarium, of course. But it's a really, really fun event, one of our most popular ever, and that is coming up just this weekend. So we're really excited and looking forward to that. We are full force into our Cabrillo Whale Watch Naturalist training. And so for those of you that may have missed out on joining us, we always start the first Tuesday of October. You can put it on your calendar from here to eternity. It's been the starting date forever, and we hope you'll join us. But for this year, we are really excited. We have so many great new naturalists, and we've seen a huge return from naturalists that weren't able to join us during our hybrid and COVID kind of, the quieter years, if you will. We weren't able to meet in person. We're back in person, meeting at the Cabrillo Aquarium every week. It's such a thrill to have everybody seeing everybody face to face again. So we're really excited about that. I would love to also bring on Louisa Beck, the president of the Los Angeles chapter of ACSLA, to say a few words. Hello, Louisa.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us. So ACS in general is having their big conference coming up. I believe it's the 18th International Conference. It will be in San Diego this year, and it's next weekend, November 4th through the 6th. And if you guys want to join, it's not too late. You can attend virtually or in person. It is a hybrid. But just go to acsonline.org and you'll find all the information you need. Thanks, Diane.
But now we are going to jump to the fun stuff. I'm really excited to have Jessica here with us tonight. She's an amazing speaker, and she's put together a really fun new presentation for us tonight to kind of fit this fun deeper dive format. As many of you know, we really look to not only dive in as deep as we can, take a different look and a little bit of a different approach at some of the animals and some of the wildlife and marine mammal research in general. But we also really want to engage you, the visitors, the attendees. So please do participate via chat and Q&A. So if you have, we'll take short breaks every now and then. I think this time we're going to have 4 segments. So after each segment, Jessica has built in a pause slide, and we will take some questions and try to get as much and answer your questions and try to get you involved as much as possible. So I'm really looking forward to that. Do please post into the Q&A for questions for the speaker. It makes it the easiest way for us to be able to keep track on that. And at this time, I'm going to pop out, and I'm just going to welcome you, Jessica Crance from NOAA Fisheries. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a great pleasure to speak with you guys. So thank you for giving me this time. So just a little bit about myself really quickly. I graduated from the University of San Diego with my master's degree in 2008. I think it's a lot of math. And then after that, I moved up to Seattle, Washington. I took a job with the Marine Mammal Lab. That's part of the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, which luckily for me is based in Seattle and not in Alaska. And so the bulk of our work that we do here is for passive acoustic monitoring of marine mammals. And so we are tasked with monitoring all the marine mammal species in Alaskan waters. And so with passive acoustic monitoring, because we are tasked with studying these marine mammals year round, you really do need to be able to study them all year, right? They don't just come into the area at certain times. You got to know what's happening. So we need to be able to monitor year round, but Alaska, it's a very logistically difficult area. It's very expensive to get to and to access. And it's a really large area to monitor. I mean, if you look at, Alaska relative to the lower 48, it's a huge area. So because of this, the traditional kind of vessel surveys or even aerial surveys are really not effective for year-round monitoring. And so the best way that we have found to be able to monitor for these animals is to use passive acoustics. And so this map here shows the location. Each of those circles is a location where we have a passive acoustic recorder. And so you can see we're able to cover a pretty significant portion of the area, but we really only need to go up there once a year for about a month or two in order to do this. And so what I wanted to talk with you a little bit about today is to go more into the background or more into kind of behind the scenes of the field work aspect of this. You always hear all those really pretty calls, those sounds, the humpback song, whatever, but I wanted to talk about what it takes to collect those data. And so hopefully you'll leave here kind of with a better understanding of what life is like out at sea in this really remote, logistically difficult area with, kind of extreme weather patterns. And then of course, talk about my favorite animal, the North Pacific right whale, because I have to throw it in there somewhere. So there are a plethora of different types of acoustic equipment that you can use to listen for and monitor for marine mammals. You can use some real-time instruments like sonobuoys or towed arrays. You can use autonomous vehicles like a glider that are, good for maybe a few month-long surveys. Or you can use bottom-mounted long-term recorders. And these are really our bread and butter. This is the bulk of what we do for monitoring marine mammals. And so I just wanted to start with these. So there are many, many different examples of long-term autonomous bottom-mounted recorders. And so autonomous means that it records to an internal hard drive, right? So you actually need to retrieve the instrument in order to get the data back. And all moorings essentially have kind of the same components there, but there are a lot of different designs to them that have a lot of pros and cons. Hopefully you can see my mouse as I'm doing this, but on the left-hand side, these kind of two yellow circular floats. This is called a double bubble or a pop-up. The technical term is a maru. This is a Cornell design. These are really small and lightweight, so they're good for easy deployment from a variety of vessels. But their release mechanism, they use a burn wire, and that's been known to fail. This mooring here, the second one, this is actually designed by our colleague Manolo Castellote at the Marine Mammal Lab. These are deployed in the Cook Inlet for listening for the endangered Cook Inlet beluga population. And the Cook Inlet here, it's very shallow. It has extremely strong tides. And a lot of sediment deposition. And so this particular design is meant to keep the float and the recorder up high enough so that they avoid getting buried under the sediment, but also is low profile enough for the shallow waters. These next two examples are some of your kind of crane deployed inline moorings. This is a harp designed by Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And then this one over here on the right is one of our moorings. And so ours, we use chain with ours because most of them are deployed in areas of really heavy fishing activity. And if we were to use just regular line, we run the risk of losing quite a few of our moorings. So we end up using chain, which does add a lot of weight and a lot of length. So we have to have quite a bit of flotation and a heavy anchor to keep it in place. So going into this in a little bit more detail, so with our mooring design here, you've got a 30-inch steel float at the top, and then our acoustic recorder. We use an instrument called an ARL, and this is kind of a blown up picture of it here. And then you have an acoustic release at the bottom, and that lets us break free from the anchor when it comes time to retrieve it. I'll talk about that a little more in a little bit. And then we use railroad wheels for anchors, which is about 800 pounds or so. And our instrument, this Aurel, it's roughly about 6 feet long, and it weighs almost 130 pounds. So this just gives you an idea of the scale of our instruments. They're very big. They are very heavy. We do need a crane to deploy our moorings. So let's talk about deploying, right? You hear about deploying the moorings, using a crane, hand deployed. What does that mean? And so a lot of this talk is just going to be me throwing a whole bunch of photos at you, watching some videos, just so you guys really get a good idea of, what goes on to deploy and retrieve all these instruments. So the first step for us is always to just get the entire mooring out and connected on the deck. So we'll bring out the individual components. Here's that acoustic release and our recorder right here with our steel float. So you bring them out on deck, and then you get them all connected. You connect the different portions of the chain to the anchor, to your release. You cotter pin everything to make sure that they stay put. And then once it's all connected and kind of coiled up on the deck, then you can go ahead and use the crane to lift it up and until it's all in line under tension, basically. And whenever we're lifting, we always have taglines on things to just keep it in place, keep instruments and equipment from swinging around. So then once the whole thing is in line, it's under tension, at that point, the crane can just pick up the whole thing and put it over the side. Once the mooring is in the water and we've got the float at the surface, we'll then use something called a quick release. And so here's an example of one of them here. So this is a piece of slip line on the left here that's going through the pad eye on the steel float at the top, with the other half going into this bottom part of the quick release. We've got a safety pin here to keep it from deploying before we're ready. And so when the time comes, once it's in the water over here, as you can see in this right-hand photo, we will pull that safety pin, but then you pull on the line, it releases this swing arm, which opens up that mechanism. So then the slip line slips out of the float and allows that float and the mooring to then drop down to the ocean floor. So I want to show a video of the whole process here. This is a time-lapse video, so it's going to be a little bit jerky, but I just wanted to get you guys a visual of what we're talking about when we say we connect it all, raise it up, and drop it overboard. So here's a quick time-lapse video. So here we are bringing out the different pieces, getting them all chained up and connected. So everything's connected now. We're just doing the final check, making sure the diagram looks good. Getting the crane ready and attaching that quick release hook to it. So we've got our taglines. We raise it all up when it's under tension. It drops over the side. We bring it over and pull the quick release. And so at that point, the whole thing will drop down to the ocean floor. So that was a real quick video, but hopefully that gives you a nice idea. This happened to be a really nice day. We had a pretty flat, calm sea, so that's always a good day when you're in nice weather. All right, so what about the reverse of that? What about when we want to recover the mooring? So when we want to retrieve a mooring, the first thing we do once we're on site is, we need to make sure the mooring is still there. So to do that, we can actually communicate with that acoustic release. And so we will drop a transducer in the water, and that's this instrument here with the coil, right? And this is the deck set that we use to work it and to control it. So we drop that transducer in the water, and we can send a code from there that is received by the acoustic release. And then it will respond as well with a code or a series of pings. And based on that code, that series of pings, we can tell that the mooring is still there, which is always good. We can tell that it is still vertical, meaning the flotation is still attached, which is a good thing. And it'll also give us a range, how far away it is. And so that's really instrumental, because sometimes we will get on site and our mooring will be, 2 kilometers away because it's either been drug or something happened. So you never want to release it, obviously, until you're close, it's there, you're getting a good strong signal. So then once we are in position, we know it's close. Oh, hang on. My VPN is about to die, so hopefully it doesn't kick me out. Diane, shoot me a text. Let me know if I end up dropping you guys really quickly. But so once we are on site and we're ready to retrieve, we'll send a second code from that transducer that will then trigger the swing arm here. So this is when it's empty. It has not been set, but here you can see we have this link that is secured to it. So when we go to release it, this breaks free, and this link that is attached to the anchor, that breaks free. And so from there, everything from the acoustic release up will then float up to the surface where we can retrieve it. So once the float comes to the surface, we can hook it with the boat pole. We can get the crane hook on it and start lifting it up. We'll attach taglines as we go along. And so here you can see, here's the bottom of the release, right? So the only thing that we lose is the chain and the anchor. And then the release, the recorder, and the float are brought up on deck. And from there, once it's out on deck, we'll go ahead and take it apart, right? Remove the cotter pins, remove the chain, and we can get those pieces out of the way and clear the deck for the next stop. And so here is another time-lapse video of a mooring recovery. So I'll go ahead and play that. All right, so here, bringing it alongside, got it on the hook. So once we're ready, we bring it in close to the side of the boat, attach our taglines, bring it up, grab that release, lay everything down on deck. And now we can go ahead and break apart all those cotter pins, the chain, move everything out of the way. And now the deck is cleared and we're ready to go. So one thing I want to mention, some of you eagle-eyed observers may have noticed that in this video, the mooring had 2 floats attached to it, as well as an additional instrument below our recorder. So we collaborate really quite heavily with PMEL, which is an oceanography group at our center. And a lot of our moorings are either co-located with their oceanographic instruments, or there are several moorings where our instruments are put on their moorings. And so it's a great way to get that, that correlating oceanographic data along with the marine mammal presence. It's fantastic for doing full ecosystem-based analyses. And it's wonderful to collaborate it. It cuts down on mooring costs, on time. And so that's, we really rely quite heavily on our collaborations with PMEL. And I want to talk a little bit more about this. One of the sites where our instruments are co-located has a big surface float on it that we call Peggy, named after Peggy Dyson, Oscar Dyson's wife, who is a scientist with NOAA. So this mooring is the entire length of the water column, about 70 meters, and it has instruments located about every 5 meters or more, all the way down from the surface to the ocean floor. And the float itself is, I think, about 8 feet in diameter or so, as you can see here. So to deploy and retrieve this mooring, we actually have to do it in multiple pieces, or in what we call picks. So we'll actually break this one mooring into about 8 or 9 sections or picks. And so in this photo in the middle, you can see where prior to deployment, all of these sections are prepared on deck. All of the chain that we need is ready to go in preparation for deployment. So here's just another short time-lapse video of us getting all of those instruments out and getting those sections of chain ready for deployment. So those are all the instruments. We're attaching some of the chain. And so that was a very quick video. You blink and you miss it. So this is in preparation for deployment. So when we're doing this one, we're actually going to deploy the float first, and then you can attach it to a working line here and basically attach one section of chain at a time until you get to the end. And with that, with Peggy, we'll use one of these big, I think it's a 3,000 pound anchor here. So we always do that at the end just because of the weight of the anchor. And I don't have a time-lapse video of the deployment, but I do have one of a recovery. And this is a little bit different because on the Dyson, we use the A-frame. On this one, we're going to be using a side crane. So I'll play this video here. So you can see there's the float. We just got it on the hook. And so now we're going to slowly raise it up. We get it to a certain point. Hopefully you can see there's a little bit of chain attached to the rail here. So we get it up long enough and we'll attach it to the chain that's attached to the ship. Then we can break that top section. And then once that's free, we can then bring that float on deck. And then the next step is to get that secured on deck. Obviously, it's a huge mooring. We got to make sure it's secure. So we take a lot of time to really strap that in and make it secure. Meanwhile, while we're doing this, the rest of that mooring, all 70 meters, is attached to the side of the rail here. So that's why it's important to have an experienced captain who can position the boat beforehand so it can stay in neutral the whole time and keep from fouling the prop. And so now we can attach that piece to the crane, bring it up. And again, we'll stopper it or break it one section at a time, lower that section down, get the cotter pins and the equipment out of the way, raise up the next section. And then we keep doing this over and over until all of those instruments are on deck and the instrument is retrieved. And so you essentially do that in reverse for when you want to go ahead and deploy it as well. So hopefully that gives you guys kind of an idea of the logistics and the mechanics behind these long-term mooring retrievals and deployments. And so with that, I'll go ahead and stop here temporarily and see if there are any questions.
I love the gear. You are on a working, a working vessel. So there's a lot of safety gear. Do you guys go through safety training as well for this type of deployments?
We do, not specifically for the deployments themselves, but just because of the nature of the work, we have all of your wilderness first aid training. We go through cold water survival training, and then we're always wearing full safety gear: hard hats, steel-toed boots, flotation. If we're close to the rail or on the fantail of the Dyson, we're usually strapped in with safety lines. So yeah, it can be some pretty dangerous work, and some of that I'll touch on a little bit later. So safety is always number one. Anyone can stop ops at any time and hold up their hand. I'll stop for any reason. But yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'll hold off on other questions in case you're going in that direction. I thought the time-lapse videos were really cool. I thought that was great to see. Sometimes it's hard to completely wrap your head around the length and all the amount of equipment that you're putting out. So I think the time-lapse really helped to nail that. We already have some really great questions.
Excellent.
Nancy's wondering if there's a way to alert boats and fishermen to the presence of the acoustic floats.
There is. We actually provide the Coast Guard with a list of all of our mooring locations. And so we give them a list. It doesn't often make it on the official charts, but that list they will send out to mariners every year. So we do that. PMEL does that. It's pretty common practice for anyone who has a subsurface mooring. Especially in areas of heavy fishing. We don't want our gear fished up. The fishermen don't want us, don't want our gear to get caught in their nets. We always put together a list and send it to the Coast Guard for notification.
Yeah. Along those lines, these are all relevant to that same train of thought. How many of those instruments are out there? Tamara is asking.
Ooh, good question. We have about, I think, 23 at current count. So that first map I showed you guys is where each one of these moorings is with our acoustic recorders. So yeah, I think between the Gulf, the Bering, the Chukchi, and the Western Beaufort, we've got about 23 moorings currently deployed.
Wow, and Mary's asking how long the recorder stays in the ocean.
Good question. These will usually stay out for about 1 year. So usually we end up going kind of in the summer time when it's the open water season where there's no ice. And so we'll retrieve them and put them down there, put them down again. Our instruments are on what we call a duty cycle. So it will record for a short time and then turn off for a short time. And so by duty cycling it like that, you can conserve batteries so that our instruments will last for a full year, sometimes more. We try and retrieve them every year. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Either ice is in the way. COVID was obviously a big hindrance. We had a lot of instruments that stayed out for 2 years. But we try to retrieve them every year because the batteries will die eventually. They do get a lot of growth on them the longer they stay out. The batteries in the acoustic release could die if they stay out for too long. So we have had a lot of really good success in getting instruments back that have been out for 2.5 years. But normally they are turned around every year.
So your battery, the battery is one component of what helps continue the recording, but your storage capacity, what kind of storage you can record for an entire year or more?
We can, yeah. And there's a lot of different instruments that will allow you to record at higher frequencies or for longer durations. We can go for a full year if we have about a 30% duty cycle. So our instruments right now will record for about 1 hour and 20 minutes every 5 hours. So they'll record for 1 hour and 20, and then they'll be off for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Is that right? Yeah. And then they'll turn on again. And we chose that cycle because then that period where it starts recording advances every day by 1 hour. So we're not recording the exact same 1 hour and 20 minutes every day, right? Because you want to be able to get the full 24-hour time period.
Okay, excellent. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's fascinating. Okay. Tamara asks, how far can we get info from these? I guess, but yeah.
Yeah. So it depends on oceanographic conditions, based on what's happening with the sound speed profile. It's very species dependent. So your louder species like sperm whales, blue whales, fin whales, we can hear them for many, many miles. Your quieter species or your higher frequency species like killer whales or bearded seals, we think we get about 20 miles or so range. So you just picture about a 20-mile radius around each of those locations. And that's on average what we can get for some of your higher frequency species.
That's great. That's quite far.
Mm-hmm.
We have an anonymous attendee who asked how the operation is financed.
Ooh, good question. So we actually rely pretty heavily on soft money. And so a lot of our moorings have been funded through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management or through other organizations, other programs within NOAA. We now have a nice pool of all of our instruments. So we own these instruments outright. Some of your instruments, like the harp from Scripps, you would typically lease that. You wouldn't own it. So we do have all of our instruments. We own them. And that really helps to then, cut down costs. We have this pool of recorders. The mooring cost itself is pretty inexpensive. It's about $2,500 total because, again, we already have the other components. We have floats, we have recorders. So really the only expense for the moorings is the anchor, the chain, batteries. And And then, of course, the ship time. We have not had our own dedicated survey in many years. And so we do rely very heavily with those collaborations that I mentioned. We'll go out on PMEL surveys, which are funded by a different section of NOAA. And we actually this year have had a lot of collaborations with fishing vessels that have deployed our moorings, or we actually had our fish surveys, our ground fish program, deploy a mooring for us on the Oscar Dyson while they were out. So it's a lot of collaborating with other people as well to have them retrieve and turn around moorings for us.
Wow, that's cool. We have a couple questions I'm going to combine from Mary and Terry, and Barry. Actually, Mary, Terry, and Barry. Interesting. They're all asking a little bit about like the height of the float. Peggy sits at the surface, right? And the others are down, down more at
Correct.
the bottom. And so a little bit like what's the weight, and then how do you talked about how you locate it again with your GPS, and you get on site, and then you do the acoustic, and then it releases. Do you retrieve anchor and chain was one of the questions. That is the stuff that falls behind, correct?
Correct. Yes. Unfortunately, we cannot retrieve the anchor and the chain. We do,
but the majority comes back up.
Yes, everything from the release up.
Everything from release up. So how long does it take to deploy Peggy? And then you do recover it. That is also part of that question. So I think that kind of was a little bit of a recap on a lot of stuff. But then how long does the deployment take?
Peggy is certainly our longest deployment. It takes, I'd say, about all told, from starting to bring the instruments out and create those sections to the time when we are letting go of that quick release, it's probably about 5 hours.
Wow. That's a lot of equipment and a lot of segments. So
it is, once Peggy itself is in the water, the rest of it does go fairly quickly, but it's a lot of coordinating. I mean, the Peggy float is it's obviously very heavy. It's very large. The chain that is immediately below that is about this. Each link is this big. It's extremely heavy and cumbersome. And obviously, we want to make sure that we're not putting anyone at risk or damaging any instruments in the process. So just getting that big float and that initial string of instruments in the water, that is kind of the longest part, that and all the prep. Once that's in, the rest of it takes maybe 45 minutes.
One more quick question. Natalie's asking about other deployments in other species. So she's asking, well, actually, and this would actually be some of your deployments, are any deployed near gray whale feeding grounds?
Yes, we have. So up in the Chukchi, we have quite a few. There are 3 kind of primary feeding areas for gray whales. There's one in what's called the Chirikov Basin, which is kind of near St. Lawrence area in the Northern Bering. There's one in the Hope Basin, which is, if you're looking at Alaska, is that the right orientation for you guys? So Bering Sea, right? You've got kind of Nome here, the Bering Strait. So just north of that in Point Hope area, we've got some through there. And then their primary feeding area is kind of the Wainwright, Utqiagvik area up in here. And we do have a couple of recorders as well in there. So we do get quite a few gray whales up in the Chukchi. We don't get as many gray whales on our Bering Sea moorings because they do tend to remain more coastal in that area, and our moorings are more offshore. So we don't get a lot of gray whales on those moorings, but everything from the Northern Bering and up we do. Okay.
I think the next set of questions that have come in are about analysis and about collecting your data. So I would imagine that might be something we can hold off till the next break. That probably is something you might be starting to touch on. I don't know. I'm just
eventually. Yeah. Eventually.
Yeah. So we'll save those until you get to that area. So I think it's a great time for you to go ahead and take back over.
All right. Sounds good. Let's go back over here. All right, so for this next section, we were just talking about those long-term instruments that stay out for the full year that allow us to monitor year-round. The other side of that, of our kind of monitoring coin, are those short-term real-time instruments. And so, again, these can be your towed arrays, your sonobuoys. These are the instruments that are used while you're out at sea on the vessel to listen in real time for marine mammals. So we're going to start with the towed array. So this is towed behind the vessel while it's underway, so it's as streamlined as possible. But because of the flow noise from the movement and the vessel noise, you typically filter out anything in the lower frequencies, but anything below about 2 kilohertz or so. And so this is really ideal for your higher frequency species, your dolphins, porpoises, beaked whales, sperm whales. And so up here in your right-hand corner, this is what the towed array looks like here. It's just this long tube filled with oil. It's actually very close to salt water in terms of acoustic properties, which is why we use mineral oil. And then in here are all the hydrophones. And it's called a towed array because there are multiple hydrophones within this one tube. And so you would typically deploy it using a winch. So here's the array wrapped around the drum of a winch, and then that is paid out behind the vessel while you're underway. So this is kind of the monitoring setup for towed arrays. So I'm going to go through each of these screens in a little bit more detail. So the first step is that right-hand screen. So this is a real-time display of the sounds that are coming in. It's basically it's a spectrogram, so it's a visual representation of your sound. And so this shows a whole bunch of dolphin clicks that are coming in and being detected in real time. Oh, my middle photo went away. I don't know where that went. So, well, I'll back up here a little bit then, bring this back up. So this photo, it's difficult to see, but what you're looking at is the bearing to each of those clicks. So it has those multiple hydrophones, so you can get a bearing to the calls, to the vocalizations. And so you can see these white lines here. Those are clicks that were detected at a certain bearing. So the vessel's kind of moving to the left here. And so those calls are all different bearings to clicks. But because it's in line with the vessel, you don't know which side of the boat those clicks are coming from. We have what's called left-right ambiguity. It could be coming from either side. So that's why these bearings look like a V. And you could figure out which side they're coming from by turning that vessel and seeing where those new bearings then become. And that would let you know which side of the vessel the animals are on. But if you're just going straight, you have that left-right ambiguity. All right. And so then the left-hand screen, this is actually showing those real-time clicks that have been color-coded by species, and it's showing the bearing that they're coming in at. So you have 0 degrees or straight at the bow relative to the ship. So straight from the bow, you've got 180 degrees is this line here, and then 360 would be completely aft or directly behind. So you can see these clicks coming from animals that are in front of the ship to passing the beam and then coming behind it. And they're all color coded based on species. They have an automatic classification system built in. And so this is just a really, really nice system for monitoring and tracking species. You can use this to get abundance estimates if you have enough detections. So it's really an incredibly useful tool. But the towed arrays are typically used in deep water or places that have a lot of those higher frequency species. We typically don't really have either up in our study area. The Bering Shelf and the Chukchi Shelf are really quite shallow, and we predominantly have lower frequency species, baleen whales or some of your pinnipeds like walrus. So we don't often use towed arrays for our work. We rely very heavily on sonobuoys. So this is kind of a sketch of a sonobuoy. You've got a float at the surface with the hydrophones and the weight hanging below. And that float has an antenna inside that will then transmit signals in real time back to a receiver on the vessel. So this is what they look like. On the right here, you can see the various components. Here's the top part with the float that'll hang at the surface with the wire and the hydrophones hanging down. And then at the bottom is a weight with a compass. And so you throw it overboard, and then here's what that float looks like at the surface. And because they transmit signals via VHF, you do need to have antennas installed on the vessel to receive the signals. And so we use two different antennas, an omnidirectional one, which is this top one here, and then a directional Yagi antenna. So the omni antenna can receive signals in any direction. So if the vessel is turning or maneuvering, then your sonobuoy might end up either in front or a beam of the vessel. We would still be able to receive the signal. The Yagi is a directional antenna, so it can only receive signals in the direction that it's oriented. So we always have our Yagi antenna facing towards the stern, and that will allow us to receive a stronger signal when we're transiting and we know that that sonobuoy is going to be behind us, directly behind the boat. And it ends up providing a much stronger signal because it has multiple antennae in it. And so because we need a line of sight from the antennas to the sonobuoys, you want to get them up as high as possible on the vessel as you can to maximize the amount of range you'll get for each sonobuoy. And so when you're installing these, sometimes installing them is in a nice, easy location, like on a flying bridge on this vessel here. But other times it can be really quite challenging. Sometimes it's where we install them, we have nothing more than a catwalk up here, or in one year there was nothing but a mast, and so I had to go up there and drill holes and install our antenna on just one lone mast like this. So I will say we had our safety harnesses on the whole time. We were strapped in, but yeah, this is one of those kind of unknown challenges that comes with sonobuoys and field work is sometimes it's a really nice, easy installation, and sometimes it's less so. So we get the sonobuoys from the Navy. They use them for their missions, but once the battery has expired, they can no longer use them on our missions, and so they will often donate them to us for science, which is fantastic. So when we get them, they come in these large crates of 48 they're all inside this outer yellow tube here. So we have to first pop them and get the sonobuoys out. And then we'll do some modifications, sometimes replacing dead display batteries. We'll tie them up to shorten the depth. We do remove as much unnecessary plastic or parts as we can. And then at that point, they are prepped and ready for deployment. And so we keep the prepped buoys in what we call a staging area. So it's basically a series of those outer tubes that we have secured to a rail somewhere that's closest to our deployment point. So when it comes time to deploy, we'll remove a sonobuoy, we'll program it, set it to a specific frequency, and then from there we can deploy it overboard. The other fun thing is that these actually can be deployed from aircraft as well. So they are actually designed by the Navy to be deployed from planes. And so that's why they do come with a parachute attached, is to help slow their descent speed. And we actually incorporated these into our aerial survey in 2009. And so we kind of custom made this mount here, I guess you could say, this rack for the receiving system that hangs behind the chair. So we customized it for a very, very small spot inside the plane. And they would deploy it through the belly port. So it was a really wonderful addition to the aerial surveys, and it actually helped them locate some right whales that year, which was fantastic. And so then you've got your antennas that then is fed down via cables to your monitoring station. Here are the cables coming in. And so this is what that looks like. It's enough cables to power a small third world country. But each of these three boxes here, these green boxes, these are our receivers. So we'll tune each receiver to a specific frequency that corresponds to the same frequency that we set our sonobuoy at. And so this allows us to monitor up to 3 sonobuoys at once, all from different frequencies. So we can have 3 sonobuoys in and active and be monitoring all of them at the same time. And that is really helpful because sonobuoys also have directional capabilities. So if we start hearing a target species or a call of interest, like a right whale, like these gunshot calls that you see here, we can actually deploy multiple sonobuoys at once. And then if you're receiving that call on both buoys, you can then triangulate on that call and find that location of the whale. So this is what our real-time feed looks like. You have one channel here for one sonobuoy that's deployed. The bottom row is a second sonobuoy, so it's a different feed coming in. And then over here, the black.
So we might have just lost Jessica. I'm going to send her a quick message in case she doesn't realize it. She did let us know that her VPN might have been about to drop out. I'm going to just, excuse me, just take a quick second. This is a great. Are you back? You're back.
I'm back. I'm so sorry.
Excellent. No worries.
VPN
No worries.
disconnected and kicked me out.
I was just going to send you a message, but I'm going to take this chance really quick to say there's a couple of people that have been doing some amazing questions, but they put it in chat. And I would like those of you that have posted your message in chat to post it in the Q&A. It makes it a little bit easier for us when we're taking that break instead of scrolling back up into chat. So please, to those of you, post those messages in Q&A because they're good messages and I don't want to, or questions, and I don't want to miss them. Okay, that's it. I'm out again.
Thank you for that reminder. All right, let's reshare the screen here. Apologies for that interruption. Okay, looks like you now see my screen again. So I'm not sure exactly at what point I lost you. Hopefully it was at the point where we were talking about our map over here on the right. So you
were just going to that.
Just getting to the map. Perfect. Yep. Okay. Yep. So in our map here, the black circles is our boat track. So every minute it will log our position via GPS. The red triangles is where we've deployed all of our sonobuoys. And then in this case, these blue lines are bearings that we get to that calling animal. So we'll select one call up here, get bearings to it, come in this direction, and then we'll get that same call on the second sonobuoy, get a bearing to that. Hopefully those lines cross, which is always a good thing. And then you can actually get the lat long and the bearing and distance to that animal. And so from there, we can give that to the captain, say, go this way, there's a right whale, 5 miles at 40 right. And this has really been instrumental in helping us locate the critically endangered North Pacific right whale. So my VPN kicked out almost at the exact right time because I'm going to kind of stop here. That's the end of the short-term instrumentation section and see if we have any questions.
I wanted to pipe in anyway and make a joke because you were like, yes, because you'll stop him for a right whale.
Oh yeah.
Of course, yeah. That is your focal species, but a good question is, is it anything and everything? And you particularly are hoping for right whales? Is it really just right whales? What are you listening for when you're doing all this?
So when we are monitoring, we are listening to every sound that we hear. So we will hear anything within the frequency range of the sonobuoy. So those can hear up to a maximum of 24 kilohertz. So we can get a good number of species and ranges using a sonobuoy. So we're listening in real time to everything. We will hear ships, whales, you name it. I get earthquakes that I've detected before, seismic air guns if we happen to be near an area of exploration. So we will hear and detect everything. As far as when we will break track to go to a species, that depends on what the target species is for that particular survey. As you said, right whales are the ultimate stop everything and try and find them. If we hear right whales, guaranteed. I'll be deploying multiple buoys. We'll be trying to localize on it. We have also broken track for blue whales are often a target species. So it depends on what the research objectives are, what your target species are. But right whales are the I want to say the ultimate trump card. I don't really like that word anymore, but they're the ultimate trump card for stopping operations.
We'll have to come up with something else. Maybe it's the ultimate right card. I don't know. Now we're gonna just have to name it. So just a quick comparison recap, right? So you've got sauna buoys that drop in reusable or live forever.
Sadly, no, they are expendable. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But those you're listening to live. So
correct.
You don't need to retrieve them. But the others, you recover. You can only get that data once you recover it.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. So if you happen to lose one of your long-term moorings, it was fished up, drug away, then you don't get those data. And we do have a few gaps in our data set from instruments that we've lost. In the early years, we had a little triangular array of moorings off Utqiagvik, off Barrow. And something catastrophic happened. We think maybe like an underwater mudslide, and it just wiped out the whole thing. The whole, all three of them gone.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yep. Nancy asked if you're recording the actual sound as well, or are you just getting the spectrogram?
Great question. Thank you for asking. I forgot to mention, we do record to a hard drive. Yes. So we are listening, but we're also recording at the same time. So we can always go back in and reanalyze those data. If we need to do further analyses or dig a little bit deeper into the call patterns that we're seeing, we will have those data archived. Yeah.
Zane wants to know what some of the pros and cons of using sauna buoys rather than the Peggy.
Rather than, Peggy?
Peggy. Or maybe the other hydrophones as well.
Yep. No, great question. So the main pro about sauna buoys is they're real time, right? So when we're out at sea, as we're deploying these moorings, as we're transiting to the area or from the area, we can be listening for marine mammals. So we can get a broader spatial coverage with sauna buoys because we're basically following all of our big boat tracks. So we get really good spatial coverage, but it's a snapshot of what's happening in a very short amount of time. So that's why we like to have the complement, right? We get the broad spatial coverage in the summer during our surveys, as well as the directional capabilities if we do find our target species. But they are very kind of short term and only give us a real quick kind of snapshot, a photo of what's happening. Whereas your long-term instruments like Peggy, those give us the year-round data that we have or that we need to basically track migration patterns, movement patterns. We can see whether subarctic species are starting to encroach farther north. We can tell how their distribution is changing as a result of climate change. So that's the beauty of the long-term moorings, is that it does give us that year-round information that we need, but they are on a smaller spatial scale because we only get about those 20-mile radius around each of those sites. So that's kind of the pros and cons.
Lisa had a great follow-up question to that. With the moored recorders, are you able to synthesize the data from multiple locations and also determine like this movement or to be able to pinpoint them at all?
Yeah, if they were close enough together to be able to pick up one call on all of the recorders at the same time, yes, you absolutely could. Our recorders are too far apart to do that. Again, just because we have to monitor such a large area, we just don't have the time, the resources, and the capabilities to put an entire array out covering all of Alaska. So we've deployed them in, as many spots as we can. And we're able to get a really good kind of distribution throughout Alaska to really kind of track those movements and migrations. But with one individual recorder right now, we cannot track movements or see where animals are going or get that varying information.
Okay. So you're not able to triangulate a location with the moorings, but you do with the sauna buoys.
Correct. Yes.
One of the questions that was in chat, and I'm kind of paraphrasing because I'm not able to find it right now, but I believe the question was, are you able to recognize individual calls and track them with your moorings through that? Like, are you hearing an individual and able to detect that individual's signature movement?
We are able at times to detect individuals if it's only kind of one calling animal. And we can tell, if you can tell that it's just one calling animal, so is the volume of the calls kind of consistent for a long time, that's usually indicative of just one animal, one caller. If you have a super loud and then a super soft call, then you might have two different calling animals. So we can kind of tell whether there's just one animal in the general vicinity or we have multiple callers in the vicinity. But with one of our long-term recorders, we're not able to say, this animal came from over here and swam over here and then went this way. All we can say is there was an animal within the vicinity of the recorder.
So they don't have a unique voice or, something along those lines that you're able to diagnose it that way.
Not for our population. There are some species where you can do that, where they have individual whistles like dolphins or, some killer whales are starting to get signature calls. For our species and our populations, we have not found that yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Natalie's wondering if you ever use underwater drones for visual data.
Oh, for visual data, we have not. Another group in our lab that studies fur seals, they have put video cameras attached to fur seals, and we have put video cameras on a sail drone before, an autonomous unmanned vehicle. Looks kind of like a sailboat, but we have not put videos on these. We are trying to actually get one installed at one of our locations as kind of a proof of concept, but we have not yet.
Okay. There is a question about the wavelength and frequency the hydrophones are spaced at. Maybe what's your range that you're recording at?
Yeah, so I think they're probably trying to get at, with lower frequency calls, they've got a longer wavelength. So does that mean you can hear them farther away? All of that is yes. So the lower the frequency of the call, the farther they will propagate. And so your lower frequency species like your fin and blue whales, we will be able to hear them for a lot longer, or should I say a lot farther than we will our higher frequency species. Yep.
So maybe we'll wrap up this Q&A session with one last question from Patty, who is asking if you can comment on the man-made underwater noises, be it Navy or oil and gas exploration, or maybe others even that you can share and enlighten us with, that might result in temporary or permanent hearing loss in some of our wildlife, including marine mammals.
Sure. Yeah, any sound, whether it's man-made or natural, can cause some temporary threshold shifts or some behavioral changes if it's loud enough. Typically, those are all anthropogenic or man-made. There aren't really any sounds that are environmental that are loud enough really to cause that. So sounds like seismic air guns, they are very loud. So for those who are not as familiar, you use air guns when you are trying to search for oil and gas. So it's all for oil and gas exploration. And basically, they shoot a bubble of air down to the ground. And based on the echoes that they're receiving, that gives them information about what's happening in the bottom layers. And so they will shoot an array of these guns, every 10, 20 seconds for several hours at a time. If you are close enough to the air guns or sonar or pile driving in construction, that's another one. If animals do get too close for any sustained length of time, that could cause some behavioral changes, some what we call temporary threshold shift, where it's kind of temporary hearing loss. The most common behavior that we see is just kind of avoidance of the area. We will see changes in their acoustic behavior. So often they will stop calling during that disturbance. You'll see them kind of swim away and avoid the area. But there are studies out now that do kind of correlate loud anthropogenic noises with rapid ascents in beaked whales that will cause decompression sickness and could lead to mass stranding. So it is a very real problem, and something that that is something we can monitor for using acoustics.
All right. Well, on that note, let's go ahead and I know there are a couple questions we haven't answered yet, but I think she might be jumping towards those. So we will get those if she doesn't cover it. Have no fear if you've asked a question and it hasn't been addressed yet. We will keep going. But let's take the next chapter.
All right. Sounds good. Well, the next chapter is my favorite species to talk about. Some of you, if you've heard me talk, have probably seen some of these slides, because I cannot give a talk anywhere without talking about the North Pacific right whale. I'm sure most of you are probably at least have heard of it, hopefully. For those who don't, it is the third species, probably the least known of the three right whale species. You have your North Atlantic, your southern right whale, and now you also have your North Pacific right whale. And the reason that I always talk about these animals is they are extremely critically endangered. And there are, I'm jumping the gun, so I'm just going to go into my next slide. So right whales, we keep talking about trying to find them. Why? Why are they so, why is finding them such a big deal? Well, they were once really widely distributed throughout the entire Bering and the North Pacific. But unfortunately, they became the primary target of whaling in the early 1800s. And it's estimated that between 26 and 37,000 animals were taken, with the majority of those taken in only a few decades. And so this brought the population down to what we think were maybe the high hundreds. And it was thought that the population was beginning to recover, but then the Soviets began illegally whaling in the early 1960s. And in just a few years, they took an additional 700 plus animals, and just decimated what was left of the eastern population. So what is their current population size? So this map shows all of the sightings of right whales in the eastern population from 1980 to 2003. There were many surveys that were conducted in the early 2000s, and results from those surveys revealed that a population estimate of only about 30 animals, and of that, only 8 were thought to be females. So there are considerably more people in this call right now than there are remaining animals within the eastern population of North Pacific right whales. And of that 30, it was originally thought that the ratio of males, the sex ratio was 2-to-1 male biased. But a recent study just came out that shows that it's actually over 3 males per female, which obviously is the opposite ratio you want when you're trying to rebuild a population. And so because of their low population size, areas in the southeastern Bering Sea and near Kodiak Island in the Gulf of Alaska were designated as critical habitat for right whales in 2008. So we know they can be found in these areas every year, but we have no idea where they go or even if they leave their feeding grounds, right? Their migration routes and their calving grounds are still unknown. Even if you go back into the old whaling logbooks, they mention that there was no evidence of breeding or calving grounds. We do suspect that they migrate south in the winter, like most large baleen whales do, but we have no idea what those routes are and where they could be going. So why do we still know so little about them? Why is it so difficult? Well, if you look at their North Atlantic counterpart, their entire migration route is along the US East Coast. At any given time of year, you can head to somewhere along the East Coast and see right whales. For better or worse, obviously they are also extremely endangered, and they have a very unique set of problems. But they are extremely well studied and well known because of their accessibility. they are regularly in the public's eye. Our guys, however, are not the least bit easy to get to. It's a full day steam from their nearest port, which is Dutch Harbor, that yellow star. And the Bering Sea is not known for its nice weather. I mean, it can be grumpy at the best of times and downright awful at the worst of times. I mean, imagine trying to find anything in this. And so even if we're in the area specifically looking for right whales, using sonobuoys, trying to find them, they are really tough to find because you're looking for that quintessential needle in a haystack. And so I like to kind of break it down by the numbers, right? Just to give you guys an idea. So I've been going to Alaska every year for 13 years now, minus 1 year because of COVID. And I should say our group is, we're the group that studies this population the most, right? So my numbers for right whales is probably one of the highest that you'll see. So my 13 years amounts to a total of 592 days in the field in Alaskan waters. But to be fair, a lot of those were in the Chukchi or the Beaufort, where right whales weren't known to occur. So if we narrow that down to just those days where I was in either the Bering or the Gulf, their historical distribution grounds, that's 459 days. So if you factor in bad weather days where we heard whales, but we couldn't find them, what it boils down to is of these 459 total days, I've seen right whales on a whopping 22 days total. 22. So for those who don't like math, that's, I think, 4.7% at last count. So that's our struggle. We even went 5 years total on our surveys without a sighting. So they're extremely rare. Even if we have acoustics, if they stop calling, we can't find them. And so that's our main struggle. Of those 22 days, we were in the presence of a right whale for just shy of 70 hours, which is about 2.9 days over 13 years. Even then, because you're dealing with the survivors of a population that was decimated by whaling, whenever a vessel gets near them, they flee. Their behavior becomes erratic. They become visually cryptic. So even if you find a right whale, a lot of the times the photos you get are a very low profile whale, a whale that's in a fog bank so thick you can't get a clear shot, or my personal favorite, the back of the whale as it's swimming away. So how do you study an animal that only, they're a population that only has 30 animals in a massive area that you don't know where it goes? It's difficult to find. That's why we use acoustics. They are pretty vocal animals. They do make some stereotyped calls. And so that's a large part of why we have so many recorders spread out through Alaskan waters, is so we can monitor for right whales. So I'm going to play these for you. This first one, I think, is a slightly normal volume. So we'll try this. Oop, that went away. That stopped. There we go. Let me go ahead and pause that. So that is their gunshot call. That's their predominant call type. It's the call that they use most frequently. And as you can see, it sounds exactly like it's named. This next call, I'll warn you right now, go ahead and turn up your volume a little bit. This is called the up call. I'll play that one more time just in case. And then their last one is called the moan. All right, so you can turn your volume back down to a normal level so I'm not shouting at you. So hopefully you could hear those last couple of calls. These are the main call types that right whales use. So this is what we are listening for when we are going through our data or when we're listening to our sonobuoys in real time. So that is probably the fastest I have ever gone through a segment on right whales. So at this point, I will see if there are any questions.
Definitely the fastest. We can definitely do a full talk on it, and but we'll soak up some of this other stuff as well here really quickly. Let's see. Oh, here, this is a great question from Maynard Dixon. Can you interpret the sounds? What does the gunshot call communicate? Are they mating, danger, food? What are the calls for?
Great question. I'll go ahead and back this up just so that you guys can see, maybe. There we go. Oh, did it stop sharing?
Yep.
Oh, Lord. Technology. All right, there we go. So the gunshots, we don't know for sure what the function is. It could be a reproductive display. That's kind of the main hypothesis as to what's going on. In females, it could be a sign of like an agonistic display, like a get away from me kind of thing. But we do think that primarily the gunshot is like a reproductive display, like so what you would see with humpback song, something like that. The up call, and this is all based on the Atlantic population where they are much more well studied. The up call we think is like a contact call, so they're using to stay in communication with their conspecifics between cow-calf pairs. And then the moans we don't know yet. Could just be another social call. We aren't quite sure about that one.
And Terry has a follow-up on that. If there are any other different calls that you've identified besides those three types.
The short answer is possibly. The long answer is that we have a lot of calls that occur at the same time as these call types, but we also have a lot of humpback calls that occur at the same time. And so we cannot definitively say whether they're humpback or right whale because they have very similar repertoires at times. Humpbacks also make an up call that sounds and looks identical to this one. So it's possible that a lot of these other call types are from the right whale because you do see a lot of other calls from the other populations, but we cannot say with confidence whether they're right whale or humpback.
Oh, interesting. So a couple of these questions that we had hauled off earlier, and again, I don't know what our next chapter is, so I don't want to jump ahead, but Zane is asking, what does one look for when you're combing the data? And I think you've started to touch on it a little bit, but I didn't know if you wanted to expand on that. And I'll just add to it, Edward also asked if you have the opportunity to analyze and interpret the data collected. So I think it's along the same lines.
We have, yeah. So I won't actually go into a lot of the analysis in this talk. This was kind of more on the field work methods with a little plug for right whales. So this last section, which is quick, so I won't keep you guys too long. The last section is all kind of more of the behind the other aspects of field work. What we're looking for, typically when we analyze our data, we will pre-generate spectrograms or these images of the sounds that we're hearing. And so, our analysts, we just by looking at a spectrogram, we can generally tell what species are there, bearded seals, walrus, humpback, bowhead. So as we're going through, we're scanning and looking for specific shapes to their calls. But they are indexed back to the WAV file, so we can go and listen to the sounds for confirmation. So that's what we're looking for, is we're looking for the different shapes of each of these. You can tell even just from looking at these that, they're all different shapes, different lengths, different frequencies. So that's what we're looking for when we analyze our data. As far as telling a humpback from a right whale, if we just see an up call, we can't say for certain. If we see up calls with gunshots, we know we have a right whale. If we see up calls with other humpback calls that we know are humpback, then we can say that that's a humpback. So it's also using kind of contextual clues to tell species apart.
And could you please go back a couple of slides to your photos? I think it might even be your first right whale slide with the collage of different photos.
Yeah. Let's see.
My question is, since a lot of our attendees tonight are from the Los Angeles area, you've talked a lot about them being up in the Arctic, but I mean, they're not an animal that we should be watching for here?
They are. And I wish I had like 4 hours to talk with you guys. I had to cut so much. So these animals, there have been sightings along the west coast of the US. And thank you, Diane, for bringing this up. They are rare down there, but there have been sightings all along the west coast from Washington, with the majority of them actually being in Southern California. And most recently in April, there was a skim feeding right whale seen off Año Nuevo. So they are occurring.
Wow.
Not this one, not this particular animal.
But, no, but this April.
This April.
Wow.
Yeah. So they do occur down there. And I normally have slides in here about specifically how to identify right whales relative to other species that might be confused with, like a gray whale. I left it out in the interest of time. But definitely, if you aren't sure, look it up and please keep an eye out. We do have a lot of whale watch naturalists and people that are out on the water all the time. Please, please, please keep a lookout. Obviously, these animals are super rare. Any sighting that we get outside of Alaska is really important. It helps us answer that question of where they go when they leave the Bering Sea. So if you can take photos, email me. I'll have email addresses at the end of this talk. Yeah.
And maybe we'll even get the slider that you have a really great handout, so we can make that available too. So you'll
absolutely
have the Cabrillo Whale Watch email that sent you the confirmation. If you're interested in that, I can reply with that. Two more really quick questions on right whales, and then I'll let you jump into the last section. Terry's asking if you've seen any babies or juveniles.
We saw one juvenile. There's one slide that'll touch on him. We saw one juvenile in 2017. We've named him Phoenix. But since then, we have not seen a calf since 2005, unfortunately. The animals that we all see are all adults. That's why Phoenix was such a really exciting sighting to get, because he was the first juvenile, first non-adult we have seen since 2005.
Rise up, Phoenix. Excellent.
Yeah, get him.
That's right. Dee's asking how they make the call. Is it underwater or up at the surface?
It is underwater. They typically will gunshot in the shallower water, so within the top 15 meters or so. As for the mechanisms, particularly for the gunshot, we don't know. I think smarter people than I who study anatomy and physiology of these whales might have a better guess, but I can honestly tell you I have no idea how they do that. It's got to be a pretty energetically taxing sound to make. It's very loud.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
All right. So this last section, I've talked about, all of the mechanisms behind the field work, but I really just want to get into the fun part, right? The realities of life at sea here, because I really want you guys to walk away from this kind of having a better understanding of what it's like to be out in these extreme environments for months at a time. And I love sharing this meme because it's very accurate 90% of the time, but it's that other 10% that I want to talk about. So because cruises are so expensive, we take full advantage and do as much as possible with as many groups as possible. It's not uncommon for us to do 30 to 40 moorings in a cruise, sonobuoys, zooplankton net tows, CTD casts, visual surveys with small boat ops. Because we do so much work, we have a lot of gear that we bring. This is a screenshot from one of the cameras up in the crow's nest. And I think this illustrates pretty well just the amount of equipment we have to bring. We've got two ribs. There's one here. Our primary is on deck behind this unit. We've got sonobuoys and recorders, more floats. The whole back deck is chock full of anchors. We've got 1, 2, 3 winches with us. It's a process. When we load for our survey, it's several stake trucks worth in an entire day to get everything on there. So, just wanted you guys to see the scope of equipment that we have to bring for these. And I do want to mention that it can be dangerous work at times. We deal with very heavy equipment, rolling decks. And I mentioned before, safety is always our number one priority. But I wanted to show a quick video. This shows some of the sea states that we're in when we deploy a mooring. And I do definitely want to clarify here, this looks really bad. It's not great. But the captain will, when it comes time to deploy, position the ship in a way to minimize the rolling and the movement, to give us a good direction and reduce all of that. So, this I think is, I love showing it because it does give you an idea of the conditions that we work in, but that's not really representative of what the ship is doing when it comes time to deploy. So I want to kind of be clear. But again, when we if a release won't break free from the chains, we'll have to drag for moorings. We use this big string of dragging hooks, and you can see here, our instrument kind of tangled up in the dragging hooks. So we had to retrieve this mooring by dragging it up because it would not break free with the release. But then, this is a very calm sea. This is good conditions for us. And you can just see that recorder, kind of swinging back and forth. That's 6 feet and 130 pounds. So it's really important, that you always use boat poles whenever you can to attach lines. Always have our safety gear, we're lashed in. Even sonobuoys are not without risk. We were headed right towards right whale habitat when our antennas stopped working in 20-foot seas. So as Catherine and I climbing up into the crow's nest to try and troubleshoot and fix our antennas. But again, the captain slowed down, gave us a following sea, the best possible conditions. And we were obviously safety harnessed in and secured to the ship. But I like showing it just to kind of show some of the realities of working in these extreme environments. And then moving on to a lighter side, I think it's really important to mention the state that our moorings are in when we retrieve them. For those who think this is a glamorous job, I'm here to officially put that notion to rest. This photo here on the left is one of the Peggy sections, and all of this brown gunk here is all dead jellyfish bits that then come raining down on your head when you're bringing it in. I would take showers and fling dead jelly bits out of my hair. They come back just with sometimes 2 years of growth and barnacles 4 inches high on them that need to be scraped off. You can see the carnage of us trying to clean off our instruments before we put them away. It's so grimy that we literally will use fire hoses and pressure washers to try and clean off our foulies, just because it's that nasty. So, there's often sub-freezing temps and snow flurries. This middle photo here that photo was taken as we were doing back deck ops. There was one cruise where the back deck kept icing over, and we were very much like Bambi on ice, trying to do our mooring work, and we had to use the fire hose to de-ice the deck right before we brought it up, and then spent time later on using a heat gun to try and warm up our steel-toed boots because we couldn't feel our toes. It's exhausting work. You're pulling long, tiring days. You will sleep anywhere you can, whenever you can, and for however long you can. Got your mooring prepped, but you're 20 minutes away. Perfect time for a cat nap, right? But, some of the other challenging sides is sometimes you're the only female. I wanted to bring up one of the kind of more unique cruises I've been doing in recent years called the Power Cruise. So this is a cruise that is sponsored by the International Whaling Commission with the ship and crew time provided by the government of Japan. And the survey does take place on the Yushin Maru 2, which, as many of you might know, is notorious for being a whaling ship. They do provide all of that ship time for free. And so this provides a really good opportunity for us to come on board and use that to monitor and survey areas that are difficult to access that we don't get to monitor. And so I was brought on board starting in 2017 when we surveyed the Eastern Bering Sea to use sonobuoys to help try and find right whales. And these are strictly visual line transect surveys. There is no whaling when it happens or on board. And it's a difficult cruise. It's anywhere from 2.5 months straight without a single in-port. I monitor in my room. So I sleep in my room. I stay in my room. It's very isolating. It's a traditional Japanese ship. So the culture and the food are all very traditional. And I don't like seafood. So that's always a challenge. And the other aspect is that I kind of had to learn when to let them take the lead doing certain things and when I needed to kind of insist on doing it myself. And so it was, it's just kind of finding that balance between me insisting on doing things and then at times kind of taking that step back. But ultimately, this is a really wonderful survey for us to go on. Not only does it provide us with an opportunity to survey really large areas that are often undersurveyed, but it does let us kind of reinforce that idea that, really good science does not require those lethal methods. But probably the most important thing is that we've had tremendous success in finding North Pacific right whales. So that first year in 2017, we found 15 right whales and managed to photograph 12 of them. It's the highest number seen in any one survey since 2005. We got 3 biopsy samples. This guy here, Phoenix, he's the juvenile that I mentioned. And so I think this kind of beautifully sums up some of those benefits that come with those challenges and why it is so important to maintain that collaboration. And so I just wanted to wrap up the last few slides. Like, yes, it's challenging, it's difficult, but then there's all the fun that comes with it, the camaraderie, the yoga on the back deck, the Uno nights. It's, playing cribbage on the back deck and those moments where, you get to know your coworkers so well and you have these fantastic moments together that, some of my lifelong friends were people that I met doing surveys. And so, I think it's important to highlight that. And so I hope that you guys kind of have a little bit better understanding now of some of the behind the scenes work and the field work and what it takes. So, with that, I will take questions and hopefully not keep you too much longer.
That was awesome, Jessica. And, I got goosies. That was really great, to wrap up on seeing the 15 whales and being able to document that. And I think it's really great to, have that collaboration and get that support and see the other sides of work that, are involving the Japanese in this case. So that was great. Really, really fun presentation. I know you as a new presentation for you, I think, right? You pulled in some interesting new stuff, and I'm sorry it wasn't all about right whales, although it was the common thread throughout. We do have another minute for questions, but I do want you to keep an eye on the chat box because you're starting to get lots of kudos already. Outstanding and fascinating, and Barry adds that he's in awe of your career. So you're getting a lot of really,
thank
really
you
great
all so
feedback.
much. Yeah.
I think that was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking your time and putting this presentation together.
Thank you.
I know Lisa has one other question. If you could if you don't mind going back really quickly to the 3 places gray whales feed, the Chirikov Basin, the Hope Basin, and the third one that started with a W up in the northern.
Yeah, off Wainwright and near Barrow. So with Alaska, it's all the way kind of up here in that northern part.
Wainwright. Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Thank
you.
And
I'll say, I know I didn't go into a lot of like the analysis side of things because this was more the fieldwork side, but I am happy to answer any questions. My email is up here. Feel free to shoot me any questions, email me at any time. I love talking about this. Obviously, I could go on forever. And so I know I didn't get to a lot of that side of things, but I'm happy to talk about that more. If you do see a right whale, np.rw@noaa.gov, that auto forwards to me. So I'll be the first one to get it, or just email me, or, Diane, she knows very well how to get a hold of me. But yeah, so please definitely reach out if there are more questions, because I know we're running late. I don't want to keep you long. So yeah.
That was fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Everyone, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jessica.